Hello everybody! Today we're going to be working on the fabric version of the lamppost art quilt. We're doing the painted version live. Today we're working on the fabric version. To get started, you're going to print off your pattern. The link is down below and it's a free pattern, so I hope you join me. Now on the fabric version, it's a little bit different. You'll notice a red box around each one of your designs. We're not cutting out on the red line. Instead, I want you to cut your pages right up to the design of the quilt where you see me marking here. And you might find it easier if you have a paper trimmer to cut those edges nice and straight and make it pretty quick. You can just trim off right to the design each one of your pages. Once you've gone through all of your pages and trimmed up to the design, you can go ahead and tape them together and they should line up just like this. After all the pages are taped together, your design looks like this. And for the fabric version, I am not going to use any freezer paper on the back of my fabric. For this quilt, I'm using a Kona black solid fabric, and I'm just going to pin that fabric right to my paper pattern to keep it in place. I will be using a light pad to help me see through the black fabric. And I also have a chalk marker. I'm going to put that light pad right underneath of everything. And then I'm going to outline this design. Now you'll notice I started using solid lines to mark all the positions of this pattern. But I really didn't want the solid lines showing up. So I just started using little dots. And really this is just going to give me a placement for each one of my pieces. Just like a little registration mark. There are so many ways you can do this quilt with fabric. And so the methods that I'm showing you in this video are just the way that I would approach making this particular quilt. So you'll see I've done everything except for the very center because I'm going to be using my ScannCut to cut out that lamppost. If you're fussy cutting the lamppost, you could make the registration marks exactly the same way. So once the light is off, you can see all of those marks. So like I mentioned, I'm using freezer paper. So you have Reynolds freezer paper. You could use that, and this is my favorite. This actually bonds to the fabric a little bit stronger. The paper is a little bit thicker. And I love it. So now we can actually start cutting out our pieces. I just have a piece of the freezer paper and I'm going to go through and trace each one of the different sections of this design on the dull side of the freezer paper. I'm just going to do 2 of them with you here, but for each one of these different sections of the quilt, I follow the exact same methods that I'm showing you right now. Now we're going to separate those pieces, but we're not cutting them out on the line just yet. I'm just cutting right outside of the line. Now over at the iron, we're going to be pressing this freezer paper to the right side of our fabric. Okay, so just give that a quick press. And then fuse your piece to the right side of the fabric. And once it's cooled off, then you can actually cut your design out directly on the line. We're going to leave that freezer paper right on our piece until we're ready to put it down on our quilt top. So for this quilt, I'm just going to use an Elmer's clear washable glue stick. This is not permanent. We will have to stitch all these pieces down. So being very careful, I'm going to just add some glue stick to the back of this piece and then use those registration marks and press that to dry the glue. You'll notice I'm using a sheet of paper just to cover that piece, just making sure not to get any glue on my iron. Then I use a straight pin and just pull that freezer paper right off the piece once everything is dry. That gives us a nice pretty black lines in between our pieces. That's going to look amazing. And then I'll bring you through a progression of adding each one of these pieces because I thought that would be fun. Now I know many of you will ask, won't the glue gum up your needle? No. You'll notice that I'm drying the glue when I put the piece down on the quilt top. That glue is dry, and so we can sew right through it without worrying about it gumming up our needles. Look at the purples. It's gorgeous. My painted version, I was going to do purple, but I stuck with the blues. So I'm going to have two completely different looking quilts. Now, for the center portion, I wanted to show this because not every day is a good day in the crafting studio, and I think you can relate to this. The original SVG that I offered, when I cut it out of fabric for the first time as my test, it cut out wonderfully, but you'll notice right here, the fabric kept bunching up. So I have redesigned the SVG file, and I'm going to show you here how I open it up and work with the SVG in the Canvas workspace. So now I've separated the SVG into four parts really. You have your lamppost, the inner circle, the middle circle, and the outer circle. Each one of these pieces will cut out individually, which will work so much better because the original SVG file that I created, that was all one section. And it was cutting the outline first and separating that from the base fabric. I was having such a hard time. So I want you to notice with the lamppost, we're going to cut that out first. I did just go in and group those pieces together so that when you move this around on the mat, everything moves together as one piece. For each one of your sections, once you cut out the lamppost, you can then reopen the SVG. Go back, choose your SVG. It'll bring the whole thing right back in. When you're ready to cut the inner circle, you'll delete all the other pieces, like there goes the lamppost, the middle circle and the outer circle, and then you can cut the inside circle as one piece. Once you've cut that, you'll go back in, reopen the SVG file, and then we're going to separate everything away from that middle circle piece. Put that on the mat, and then you'll cut that piece out separately, and then do the same thing. Get rid of that, open the SVG one last time, and you'll cut out that very outer circle all by itself as well. Once I separated all these pieces and cut them out individually, my day went much smoother and I was very happy. So for the very inside portion of my lamppost, I'm going to be using Heat and Bond Light on the back side of my fabrics. And then I'll just walk you through as I'm cutting out each one of the sections of the center of this quilt. And you can watch along. I do tape my fabric down. I'm using a standard cutting mat. And it's a slightly sticky, but not fully sticky. It's a well-used mat. And one of the things that I love about the ScannCut is that once you import the SVG, you can actually scan your mat and see exactly where that fabric is, and then position your SVG right over top of where your fabric is, and then cut out your piece. Now you can certainly, if you don't have a cutting machine like a Cricut, Silhouette, or a Brother ScannCut, you can certainly still do this quilt, and you would just fussy cut the inside lamp post portion of this quilt. It is not impossible, and to be quite honest, after struggling so many times with the original SVG, I seriously contemplated just fussy cutting it, and but I'm glad I didn't give up and I redid the SVG file. So here is the lamp post. We'll weed out the extra fabric bits. And then carefully we'll lift up all of the scrolling parts of the lamp post. And we're going to set this portion aside. And then I'll load a light yellow fabric and cut that inner circle. And then a little bit of a darker yellow, and we'll cut the middle circle. And then an orangey color fabric for the very outside circle. Again, all of this can be done without a cutting machine, but with a little bit of patience, I think. So now let me show you, I want to put white right in the center of the lamp post. So let me show you what I plan to do. I'm going to bring in some Heat and Bond light, and right in the black outline, right in the middle of that, I'm just going to create myself a shape that will fit right in the outline. Fuse that onto some white fabric, and then very carefully position that right underneath the lamppost. And I'm going to pre-fuse this right here on my mat. You'll notice here I'm using a non-stick silicone mat. It's the same mat you would bake cookies and all kinds of stuff on in the kitchen, but it also helps you pre-fuse your pieces, and you're able to lift off your applique without ruining the Heat and Bond or your fusible product underneath. What I really like is you can line up your pattern and exactly place your applique and pre-fuse your pieces before you put them onto your quilt. So you'll see I'm lining up my lamp post to that very inner circle, and I'll fuse that down. Once that's fused down, we can lift that right up off the mat and fuse this to our quilt top. So at this point, I'll be eyeballing the placement for the center circle, the middle circle ring, and the outer ring. So I'm just carefully lining up everything. I did have to finagle this back and forth for a little bit, and I really wish I would have paid a little bit closer attention, because I didn't exactly center that middle circle exactly right. The line right above that middle circle is a little bit thin when I go to fuse it, but I still think it turns out fantastic. Once you have all of those pieces in place, you'll just fuse them with your iron. Even if you're fussy cutting the center portion, that's how I would line up all of those pieces and get them into the center portion of your quilt. So here we are with all of our pieces glued down to the background, right? We've used freezer paper and glue stick on all of these outside pieces, and I did use the Heat and Bond on this center portion. At this point, with the freezer paper method and with the Heat and Bond light, we have to stitch all of this down, right? Because none of this is permanent over any length of time, any extended length of time. And you certainly ever couldn't wash it without all of this being stitched down. Now, stitching down all of these bigger pieces would not be that difficult, right? You could choose any stitch in your machine, like a zigzag stitch, a blanket stitch, satin stitch, a straight stitch, all the decorative stitches. You could go to town stitching down all these larger pieces pretty easily. Where I think you'll come into A little bit of a more time-consuming process would be stitching down the scroll of the lamppost, right? Not impossible, and you can certainly do that. But here's the thing. I don't want to stitch down any of this. I, of course, want to quilt this, but I don't want to be defined in my quilting by absolutely stitching these pieces down. I have not yet decided how to quilt this. So you can either take this now, this layer, without putting your batting and your backing, and you could stitch all this down. Or you could baste it with your batting and your backing fabric, baste all 3 layers, and then stitch it down and quilt it at the same time. I'm going to add a batting, a thin cotton batting, and a backing, and I'm going to cover mine with a piece of organza. This is the darkest organza I have on hand, and I don't really feel like going to buy any more right now, so we're going to use this one. But you can see when you lay it over top, it dulls the colors just a little bit, but you can still see everything very nicely. So after I've basted my top with the batting and the backing, I'm going to pin baste this organza into place and quilt down my, do all of my quilting then. Now, as far as time to get to quilting this, I don't have any right now. So what I'd really like you to do is, if you haven't already, is subscribe to my channel so you can keep up with the updates. And I'll be giving updates on the quilted version of this, along with the painted version we're doing on the lives on Friday. So I'll give you updates then on the quilting of this one, or maybe make a separate video when I can get to this. But I did not want to wait till I can do that to publish this video, because I do know I have a couple friends who are waiting to see this portion done with the Scan and Cut so that they could get started on theirs. So we're going to post this video now. And I certainly hope that this has inspired you to make this art quilt. Again, the link is down in the description box. It's a free pattern. If you want the SVG, I have updated that, and the link for that is down below as well. Okay, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me, and happy crafting. I will see y'all soon. Bye, everybody.